Well, no, this is the wrong slide. 40, try 42. Yep. That's probably is it the scripture page, Nehemiah 2:16? Okay. That's the one I want. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Okay. This is where we're starting from last week. So Nehemiah 2, beginning in verse 16. Everyone was here last week, right? Yeah, okay. 2:16. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, but as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start building." So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We his servants will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or any historic right to it." Amen. So, commentary. Nehemiah had not told anyone the reason for his presence in Jerusalem, so on the following day he assembled the elders. And the elders, these are like the business civic leaders, of the community. The Jewish townships had a unique system, and they have that system to this very day. And I'm trying to remember the names for everything. I think they call these little districts, they call it a kibbutz. And what it is, it's really where you have people that act kind of as religiously and politicians, kind of they share that office, if you will. Okay, it's like the elders of the city, and they kind of make, obviously not the federal laws of the land, but the local municipal laws. Municipal? Hard word. In verse 17, Nehemiah reminded them of their serious dilemma concerning the absence of city walls and gates, and how previous attempts to rebuild them were unsuccessful. The walls had been destroyed for 135 years. Based on that little timeline I gave you last week, I was kind of adding that up. And the people had become complacent and accepted their sad state of affairs as the new normal. But Nehemiah challenged them to remove their disgrace by rebuilding the walls and gates. Then Nehemiah explained how the hand of God had been upon him and shared the king's royal sanction and authority, probably by showing them the king's letters. Said, here before you are the king's letters, and he explained everything. So these people had no reason to trust Nehemiah, but again, he leveraged his address by invoking the name, first of all, of God who is alive, active, and prepared to reestablish them, and the name of the king who commissioned Nehemiah and provided the financial backing. So that's one thing. If you ever have to write a letter to somebody and you're trying to make some changes in the community, it always helps to leverage names, okay? The motivating words of Nehemiah and the sight of his credentials revived the depressed people, and they were excited and eager to begin rebuilding. The Jerusalemites and others began to rebuild, but Sanballat, Tobias, and now a new third individual is named. His name is Geshem, heard about their building program. They came to mock and ridicule the people, and they accused Nehemiah of rebelling against the king. Now, Geshem, again, we talked about Sanballat a week or two ago. We talked about Tobias. But this is a new guy, Geshem. Inscriptions from Dedan in northwest Arabia and from Tel El Maskuta in Egypt bear the name Geshem. He may have led an Arabian confederacy that controlled northeast Egypt, northern Arabia, and the southern part of Israel. Geshem probably opposed Nehemiah and Israel as an independent kingdom because their existence would interfere with his lucrative spice trade. So it's always about money, isn't it? If you think someone's going to hit you in the pocketbook, then certainly you're going to be against them, right? Verse 20, Nehemiah fired back by telling them that, first of all, they had no share in Jerusalem. And that's another way of saying you have no authority over me or any of the people. He says you have no claim. In other words, you have no claim of ownership in the civic or religious affairs of the state. And you have no historical. Their status was that of alien. Okay? When you're around here, you're considered an alien within the Commonwealth of Israel. So, boy, he really stripped them of everything, didn't he? You know, he set the law down very, very firmly, very quickly. And, you know, obviously they were allowed to come to and fro, so they weren't like illegal aliens, but he's considering them to be an alien in the land, you know, kind of a alien enemy of the state. So lessons in leadership. And most of you except me knows Sergeant Friday. Yeah, Nehemiah inspected the wall covertly to verify the facts. Only after he thoroughly analyzed the situation did he announce who he was and why he was there. Nehemiah made his proposal to the people, and notice that when he addressed them and his enemies, he only told them what they needed to know and nothing more. You know, some people have mouths that flap. A top flapper and a bottom flapper, and all they do is go flap, flap, flap. And people sometimes say too much. They spill the beans, don't they? And the thing is, whenever you're in a situation, you know, you tell them what you need to tell them, but no more. If they ask you questions, that's different. You might want to answer their questions. But if you tell them too much, then they might start asking you the wrong questions. You know, they might start getting deeper and deeper. And what a lot of people do is they like to ask questions because they're looking for weaknesses. You know, they want to put you down. And so it's just always a good thing to just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. Right? Remember that what people aren't up on, they'll be down on. Because leadership is not something that you do to people, it's something that you do with people. Okay? So he needed to tell them what he needed to tell them, right? You know, that God has sent me here on a mission. The king is sanctioning. He's backing up the plan to rebuild Jerusalem. And, you know, if people feel like they're left out of the loop, they're always going to concoct their own theories in a negative way, never in a positive way. Okay? If you think somebody's leaving you out of the loop, you're always going to start thinking bad stuff, okay? And that's why it's important, especially in a church body, that there is good communication, right? You know, we do a lot of communication I do a lot of email. I send my emails off to Trelane, and he then sends it to the church at large. But not everybody has email, do they? And that's why we sometimes say, Barbara, can you start the prayer chain and let people know this and this and this and this and this, you know? And so we try to get the word out, you know, as efficiently as possible. It takes at least a year to really know what's going on, and at least another year after that to really know who you can trust. Sometimes the people you think you can trust, you end up finding out that you can't. And sometimes the people that you thought hated you actually in the long run become your friends. It's kind of weird how things work out. It really is. So Nehemiah was a good leader. It wasn't just about protecting Jerusalem's future interests. It was about rallying and unifying and motivating people behind a common cause. In leadership, there is that psychological component, isn't there? It's not just about accomplishing the mission, but you want the people to be blessed by it. You want the people to be happy. You want the people to be unified. Maybe people that previously didn't know each other now start becoming friends because of a common shared goal that they have, and they start, going out with each other and having fun, and it's a building program or any program you do really should unify people, right? Not divide people. So it had a lot. These people were depressed for so long, they just accepted their horrible plight. They thought that was the new normal, and so really it's hard to believe really how good of a leader Nehemiah was. Let me ask you all a question, because I didn't put this question up there, but are leaders born or are leaders made? Okay, I've heard two people say made right away. Yeah. I heard born. It could be both. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if somebody is a born leader but they have no training, you call them bossy. Boy, she's bossy, Boy, he's bossy. Always tell them, well, they're just so bossy, So even if you're born with a gift like that, it still needs to be cultivated, right? Because God's given us all different gifts. And when I said born leader, that could mean literally biologically born as a leader, or it could be reborn, right, as a Christian, right? Because when you get saved, God gives you gifts, and one of the gifts is leadership. And even though it may seem to come naturally to you, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be cultivated. Because so often, like I would say, if I would ask you to raise your hand if you're saved, everybody here would probably raise their hand. Amen? But now if I ask you to go and explain to some stranger about your conversion and about the gospel, a lot of you would have a hard time with that. Because just because you're saved doesn't always mean you know how to articulate your faith to another person. So that's why again, it goes back to education and classes and learning how to do things and learning how to explain things. Notice the tactics of the enemy. They planted the seeds of doubt and discouragement in a people that were already vulnerable and sensitive. How many of you ever felt vulnerable and sensitive? You've had some tough times in your life. You felt very vulnerable, very sensitive. And boy, isn't that when the devil comes to kick you when you're down already? It's the perfect timing. Yeah. Well, not only is Nehemiah using psychology to motivate the people, I want you to notice that the enemy is using psychology to bring the people down. Yeah. The enemy operated from a position of assumed power, whereas Nehemiah is operating under a position of commissioned power. And he had the credentials to prove it, right? He said, I'm not only your new governor, I got the paper right here. Yeah. Well, Ezra was a different kind of a leader. Ezra was by himself and more of a religious leader. And very much an administrator. but a different kind of leader. And you know what? You can have one godly person in the church and everybody else full of the devil, and the church is never going to make it. I mean, there's that principle where two or more are gathered in my name, I'll be with them. And, I would say because there are different styles of leadership, Ezra needed Nehemiah every bit as much as Nehemiah needed Ezra. Yeah. Because you got to have someone to work with, right? Sometimes you got to play good cop, bad cop, right? Yeah, I mean, honestly, right? And most of all, Nehemiah had the spiritual blessing of Almighty God. So, I mean, he wasn't going to fail. If God is for you, who can be against you, right? Nehemiah was an educated, influence and motivate people. He was also a man of prayer, and God's hand was upon him, giving him long-term success. Israel was originally conquered by the Babylonians because God was punishing them for their sins. And the broken down walls and burned gates were only the physical symptoms of the spiritual problems that still existed. I really believe that. I believe that if a person is having spiritual manifest itself in their life, and if a church is having spiritual problems, it's going to physically manifest itself as well. That's why the spiritual action of prayer was so effective, right? If you have a spiritual problem, you don't fight it with swords and guns, right? You fight it with spiritual weapons. And we should do the armor of God again sometime. It's a good lesson. The Apostle Paul stated in Ephesians 6:12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So that's the real problem, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we can say the world, the flesh, and the devil. I think we create a lot of our own problems. I think we're enticed by the world, but when it's all said and done, the foundation of our problems is spiritual. So 5 guidelines for praying your all in all. Pray in all situations. As soon as Nehemiah got the bad news, what did he do? He started praying and fasting, for 4 months. Obviously not the entire 4 months straight through, or he would have been dead, but that's what he did, right? And then when the king asked him, "What do you want?" he prays under his breath and then turns to the king and gives his request, right? And so it doesn't matter what the situation is, pray in all situations. Paul tells us to do the same thing, right? Do everything by prayer. Pray in all seasons. All seasons. Again, Nehemiah, it didn't matter where he was, when it was, right? I think the king was out of town for those 4 months, personally. But Nehemiah prayed. And he prayed privately. And that means nobody knows you're doing it, right? If he was fasting privately, nobody really knew he was doing it, but God knows, right? God knows what you do in private. Number 3, pray, again, always in the Spirit. Ephesians 6:18, through the power of the Holy Spirit. So we can get more into that, but, first of all, you have to be saved, right? And when you pray in the Spirit, what you're doing is you're praying as one that is in good fellowship with God. For the prayers of a righteous person is effective, right? So you want to be in good standing with God. You want to certainly have that right fellowship and right worship with Him, and then your prayers will avail much. So pray in all steadfastness. Colossians 4:2. Steadfastness means assurance and purpose. That doesn't mean positive thinking. That's not what it means. Assurance means that you believe that God's going to do the right thing no matter what. It's not what you want, it's what God wants. And God, I'm assured you're going to do the right thing because you are good and loving and all-powerful. Okay? And you believe that, and you're praying with a purpose. You know, you don't, because they're, I pray with the coalition pastors every week, and some guys, boy, do they like to ramble. You know, they're praying and they're rambling on, and sometimes they use these really big flowery words like they're preaching. Well, don't preach at us and don't preach at God. You know, pray to God, right? Be humble. I think they are humble. I think that's just the way they are, But they go on and on and on. But Jesus said that it was the Pharisees that stand at the corners and give these long prayers and speeches, right? Because they're trying to draw attention to themselves. But he said, but you go in your closet, you lock the door, and you really pray earnestly. Give that long, thought-out, purposeful prayer, intentional prayer to God. And so, yeah. So all situations, all seasons, always in the Spirit, all steadfastness, and pray for all the saints, right? And don't forget to pray, think about corporate prayer, right? People coming together. But just think, if I'm praying for myself and for you, and for yourselves and for me, and you know what I'm saying, we're praying for each other, that's going to be effective prayer. That's a good prayer. And that's intercessory, to pray for each other. And corporate means that we come together, right? Pray about the same stuff. One thing I have to say about the pastor's prayer group is that 99.9999% of the time we're all on the same page. I mean, we really are. And so it's nice to pray for your brother when he's praying the same thing, when we believe the same stuff, So, great. So, that 5 guidelines of praying your all in all. Everybody get that? All right, now we're in chapter 3. Nehemiah, the wall was finished in 52 days. So as always, we're going to have a couple of questions to think a little bit. First question is, there are those people that want to reap all the benefits that society has to offer, but how much should they reap if they don't contribute? Not much. Yeah, and granted, there are poor widows, and there are the handicapped people, and there are, little orphan. There are people at this point in time, they're not going to contribute, Yeah, exactly. But then again, there's a lot of people, they want everything, but they don't want to give nothing. They have the capability. It doesn't have to be money. It could be sweat equity, right? Going in there and working, or, golly, if we had a 99-year-old woman in the church and she, could hardly walk or do anything, you know what I would want her to do for me? I just want her to pray for me. That's, I want her to pray for me, So everybody can contribute. Everybody, right? What about those that know how to milk the system, a system that they defy? So they're against the system, they hate the leaders, but yet they know how to milk it for all it's worth. Yeah. And it's interesting, though, how they because I know this sounds like I'm talking about today. It could be today. It could be Nehemiah's time too, right? But it's just amazing how so many people will hate the system and want to change the system, but yet they're using the blessings of the system to have their free speech and to have all the stuff that they do. And it really kind of is illogical to me. Why do you suppose Nehemiah would document people's names and what they did to contribute? Huh? Well, to give them credit. That's a good point, yes. A sense of ownership, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, me and my mom were just talking about somebody we knew years ago that, everybody would work hard and do stuff, but yet this individual would always take credit, for everybody's good stuff, And, but, it's a really good boss or a good leader, who lifts up his people and said, these are the people right here that made it happen. These are the ones, right? So, yeah. Is it wrong to make your children work? Why or why not? Okay. That's true. Right. So you lead by example and you teach them to work, right? Because, yeah. Right. Why should you get paid for something you're expected to do anyway as a member of the family? Yeah. Good point. Right. Yeah, I remember my dad when I forgot 12 years old. I was maybe 12 years old, 13. But he said to me, he said, you can be whatever you want to be in your life. He said, whatever you want to do, that's fine, he said. But he said, why don't you officially, because I always worked a little bit here and there, but, officially, why don't you work? And he said, I'll train you and I'll teach you. And that way, if you ever have a rough time in the future, you've got a profession to fall back on. And that made a lot of sense to me, and so I, got into the food business. Yeah, then I got out of it. Yeah. Yeah, I got smarter, and then yeah. Um, who owns community, or for that matter, who owns the church, and can we take personal ownership in something that we haven't invested in? It's kind of like a big loaded question. Yeah. Yeah. The word community means everybody, right? Yeah, just like our democratic republic, supposedly that we live in, we elect officials to make decisions for us, and we're hoping that they're going to make the decisions that reflect our values. And sometimes we elect somebody, and it turns out they don't reflect our values after all. But but if you live in the society, if you're law-abiding, you pay your taxes, you're contributing. Certainly, you have an ownership in the community. Very good. And what about the church? I mean, I could say Jesus owns the church, right? He's the groom, we're the bride, who died to save us. But even though the church is his, he has also given us a responsibility right now on earth to manage it, according to the book, right? And it's not always easy doing that, but times are probably going to get worse. But again, it's a responsibility whether we want it or not. That's something that God has given. Can you trust a person that is related to your enemy? Why or why not? So you find out that your new neighbor is the brother's, sister's, uncle's nephew of your worst enemy in the world. Can you trust that person, or what do you think? Huh? Yeah, you got to be careful, right? You got to be careful because, sometimes blood, don't tell them only tell them what they need to know, right? Sometimes blood's thicker than water, sometimes it's not. Maybe that guy hates his relative just as much as you do, But it's always good to be wary. You don't know who people are, right? It's like a lot of churches too are very clannish. If you ain't kin, you ain't in. That's their motto, right? Are there psychological components to leadership, and if so, what are some? We did talk about some earlier, psychological components. But what are some psychological, I hate to really use that word even, but as church people, as church leaders, what are some things that we would do? Got your hand up? Yeah. Humility? Yes. And let's say you're in a church now, okay? All of you are in a church. All of you, that are here, you more or less are not all volunteers, but you volunteer your efforts. How would you like it if somebody came up to you and started yelling at you and telling you need to do this and you need to do that, you need to do that? You'd tell them to take a hike, right? Because you're doing you're doing for Jesus, and you're doing it out of love, and one thing I learned in Bible college is when you work with a lot of volunteers, all you can do is you can ask somebody something and you can say please, and smile, and always say thank you. And you know what? If you're nice, they'll probably do what you want them to do. But honey attracts more flies, right, than vinegar. What are some things that people do to discourage others? There's always discouragers. Maybe they don't even realize they're discouragers, but they are. Critical, criticizing. Yeah, just that little question plants the seed of doubt, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, a lot of things you can, or, just faces. Or, how people smack their, people make expressions, they make little noises. Maybe they're not even aware they're doing it, but again, there's so many little signals that you can give that turn people off. So, well, good. So this is Nehemiah's 33-verse laundry list, okay? Well, that's good. It's got undergarments and all kinds of things here. That's from the Ritz-Carlton, actually. Yeah, in the old days, you could give your clothes in the fancy hotel for being laundered. That's where the term laundry list come from. And yeah. So he gives people's names. He gives their duties. He gives, whether they were, doing the wall, whether they were doing the gates. Some people did walls and gates. Sometimes it was just a repair, and sometimes it was a rebuilding job. their accomplishments, or sometimes the lack thereof, right? So let's look at some points of interest for your consideration. So I'm not going to sit there and read all these very, very difficult names. Yeah, so commentary. Now, by the way, this is a remnant of Nehemiah's wall right here. Yeah. Nehemiah chapter 13, or chapter 3. Chapter 3 is one of the most important chapters in the Old Testament for determining the topographical layout of Jerusalem. So when these archaeologists, even if they're secular archaeologists, boy, they still go back to the Bible and, you know, what did it say was over here? What did it say was over there? You know, I mean, it tells us, right? And they can kind of figure out, you know, this was from the Persian period, or this is from the Roman period, or this is, you know, back from the, you know, pre-Babylon period. I mean, they can kind of figure that out, right? And how would we know if everything's ruined and then piled, you know, they pile everything up on top of the ruins and they build on top of that, and they, you know, how in the world would you ever know what stuff is, right? So this is one of the really the most important lists. The narrative begins at the Sheep Gate at the northeast corner of the city and proceeded counterclockwise around the wall. Paul had asked about why is it always counterclockwise? And I don't know. If somebody finds that out, let me know. About 40 key name men that participated in the construction of about 45 sections of wall and 10 named gates. The text implies that most of the reconstruction was around the gates, which tended to be the most vulnerable from enemy attacks. Apparently, the walls were divided into sections that were assigned to different families that had returned from exile. Simply put, a family would repair the section of wall that was nearest their home. So if you got this wall behind you and you don't want the enemy coming in, you're going to fix that wall. Okay? Notice that Nehemiah distinguishes between repairing and rebuilding. So when you see some people accomplished a lot, well, you got to realize maybe they were doing a lot of repairs, you know. When one group maybe didn't accomplish quite as much, maybe it's because they had to completely rebuild from scratch. People generally seem to work hard with cheerful enthusiasm, okay? So the Sheep Gate. Nehemiah began his documentation with the Sheep Gate, which in the New Testament near the Bethesda pool at the northeast corner of the city. Even today, periodically, a sheep market still operates near this area. The Sheep Gate may have replaced the earlier Benjamin Gate. And by the way, Paul has done research on the gates. So, yeah. In verse 1, Eliashib, the high priest, was the grandson of Jeshua, who was the first high priest after the return from Babylon. It was proper for the priest to begin working here to set the example. So not only was the Sheep Gate near the temple and near where they lived, but they set the example. And I think Christians should set the example, shouldn't we? In our community. Even in ancient Samaria, it was documented that the king himself carried bricks for the building of their pagan temple. Then there's also a reference to the Tower of the Mia, or the 100. That's kind of a mystery. The Tower of the 100. It could mean that it's 100 cubits in height. It could mean that it was the number of its steps. It could be a military unit for the number of soldiers that were stationed there. However, it's very likely that it was mistranslated. Rather, it could be stating that the priests rebuilt the Sheep Gate and then 100 cubits of the wall to the Tower of Hananel. Okay? So, a lot that we don't know there. Okay? Nevertheless, this was part of their sacred area. The Tower of Hananel was associated with the citadel by the temple, and it was vital to protecting the north end of the city. And as I mentioned last week, the north end was the most vulnerable always, so they always got attacked from the north. Outside the sheep gate was the market whereby the sheep entered, were washed, and then brought to the temple to sacrifice. Since the priests were the first to begin working, the completion of this project was dedicated to God as first fruits in gratitude for his blessing. In verse 2, next to them were the men of Jericho that built the next section of. The fish gate was also located on the north side. In the days of the first temple, this was one of Jerusalem's main entrances because merchants brought fish from either Tyre or the Sea of Galilee to the fish market through this entrance. And before I go any further, while there are 10 named gates, you might be thinking, well, aren't there 12 gates? Well, as I understand it, a lot of these corner gates, where the corner of the wall is, they have like a little gate. Did you want to say something? Mm-hmm. Okay. I bet, yeah. My understanding is that a lot of these corner gates were the ones that were not mentioned for whatever reason. So, yeah. So I would call that a corner gate, right? All right. In verse 8, the broad wall, also known as Hezekiah's wall, was a massive defensive structure in the old city of Jerusalem. The wall was unearthed in the 70s by Israeli archaeologist Nehemiah. It was 23 feet thick. The remains are 213 feet in length and 11 feet in height. Now, what's so weird is while I was doing this research, I kind of had a memory. I think I was walking here. And I remember looking down, and I don't know if it was labeled or not. I didn't know what that was. I thought it looked weird. And I thought maybe it looked a little bit like a riverbed almost, but I couldn't figure out what it was, But anyway, I think I walked next to that thing. That terrible right now. I didn't know. But Hezekiah's wall. Verse 12. Shallum was ruler of one of Jerusalem's districts. He worked on to repair the next section of wall with the help of his daughters. Some scholars believe that his daughters refer to rich widows that lived within his district. To refer to these ladies as my daughters, okay? But we don't really know that, do we? And they helped by defraying part of the expenses by subsidizing the. So if you look at it one way, they either helped to build the wall, or you look at it another way, they paid to have it built, okay? If this reference to women working on the wall with men, if this is a reference to women working on the wall with men, it is unique, okay? Yet, according to Thucydides, a Greek historian, when the Athenians attempted to rebuild their walls after the Persians had destroyed them, it was decreed that the whole population of the city, men, women, and children, should take part in wall building. I don't have no idea. I don't think they're around anymore. That is how the writings of Thucydides is broke down, just like the Bible has the chapters and the verses. That's something similar, okay? I put this picture up here. I thought this was kind of interesting, not just because they're Jewish women, but notice what she's wearing. She's wearing the accoutrements of a rabbi. I always forget the name of that thing, the Phycolactor or whatever it's called. I remember when I was going to Israel, all these, I would say all these, Orthodox Jewish rabbis, whatever, they were all in first class, okay? But first class was filled up, and, they didn't, the leftovers didn't want to sit with us because we're the Gentiles, right? So they're, raising hell with the stewardess, and finally the stewardess said, you either sit over here with them or you get out. And so they grudgingly, sat with the Gentiles, right? So, and I got this guy right next to me, and the last thing you want to do is say, "Excuse me, I got to go to the bathroom." You don't want, because they're already mad, right? They don't say hi to you or nothing. Really mean, But anyway, but at a certain time, and I didn't really look at the time, but at a certain time, these rabbis stood up that were in our section, and they took their coats off. They opened their bins up. They took their coats, they took their hats off. They put on their phylacteries, and they disappeared. I think they all went into first class, I'm assuming, and they had their prayer time. And then a little while later, they came. Now, traditionally, women are not allowed to do that. But the modern Jewish women, many of them, not all of them, but many of them are liberated, and they want to be rabbis too, and religious leaders too. And that's a big stink in Israel. I mean, that's a big stink, right? Hey, a good point. Very good point. Because well, yeah, these women are acknowledging her as a rabbi, right? But the main establishment does not recognize her as a rabbi, So what they're at, I don't know where they're at in this particular picture, but like I saw them at the Wailing Wall, okay? And when you go to the Wailing Wall, let's say this is the Wailing Wall, you have to, if you're a Jew, you've already got a kippah or whatever on your head, right? But if you're a Gentile, they give you one of these disposable little kippahs to put on. I brought mine home. I don't know what happened to it. I think I made coffee through it, didn't I? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I put that thing on my head, and then what you do then is, you very reverently, you walk up to the wall, and you pray, and then most people, they put a little prayer request on paper, they stick it in the hole, and then every night, of course, they clean all those holes out, right? And then when you leave the wall, you just don't turn around. You stay facing the wall and you walk backwards in respect. And then when you get to a certain point, then you can turn around, okay? And if I remember correctly, the men were on one side and the women were kind of on the other side, but there was another group of women further down, and that was these type of women that very controversial thing in Israel. I thought you'd be interested in that. So, okay, hey, you know what? We're out of time.